Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Stern, for the all-too-kind introduction, and Dr. Zink and Dr. Rocker for the invitation. Truth be told, I'm a substitute lecturer. Dr. Marie Carmel Ellie was supposed to be speaking today and had a tragedy in the family, and so please keep her in your thoughts. Know that you would have had something really fantastic in this slot. But I'll try to sub. So I'm going to be speaking on visibility for women in leadership. And I look at the audience, and this is almost remarkably about a 50-50 split in terms of gender. And I acknowledge that's a binary assessment, and I'm sorry for that. But I want to convince all of you that this is relevant to everyone in the room. Okay? So without any further ado, I'll kind of get started. I have no disclosures except the obvious. I am a woman in leadership, and you just heard a little bit about that, and so perhaps I have a vested interest in this topic and have biases associated with that. So the objectives, I hope at the end of today's talk, you'll each feel comfortable describing the benefit of critical mass and the risk of tokenism, that you'll be able to refute the critical mass excuse for the low numbers of women in leadership, and then most importantly, that you'll be able to implement critical actions to help improve the right kind of visibility for women faculty. So, show of hands, how many of you have heard the old adage that to have a functional committee, you should have 3 or more of a minority group? Yeah, is that familiar to everyone? So I was trying to figure out, where did that come from? It actually came from Dr. Rosabeth Moss Cantor's study from 1977. So it's an oldie and it's a goodie. But she talks about tokenism in this study, and I'll introduce you to the concept a little bit. But I think this is the first reference of something that we hear about every day, and I want to honor her work. So in her study, she talks about kind of a sales force and what happened in the sales force as women were introduced over time to what had historically been a male-dominated profession. And she just described what they were seeing in these qualitative analyses when a woman would enter the sales force. So imagine a sales force of 10, and then there's one woman, right? So you'd see here that would be a skewed group where there's majority and minority, and when there's 1 out of 10, you have tokens. And then when you'd have 3 out of 10, you'd have a tilted group. And then 4 to 6 out of 10, it'd be a balanced group. And then you could see a tilted group the other way if women were taking over the sales force, right? And then you could have dominance and then male tokens if males became the minority. So she describes this, and she importantly describes the term tokens, right? And then further, she goes on to talk about kind of the ramifications of being a token woman in a male-dominated sales force. So this is the original science, and I think it's important just to understand the context. So let's talk a little bit about tokenism, all right? So imagine this group of people. It's not unfamiliar to many of us in the room, where you've got a group and you've got one person who is not like the others, right? She's not like the others in many ways. She doesn't have a tie, right? There are other things that are different about her, but people kind of pay attention, right? I'm a dean, and I sit around leadership tables where people don't always look like me, and so it is different because there's a lot of eyes on me in some ways. There's a heightened visibility. You can imagine when people are gathering around the veritable table, whether it's virtual or face-to-face, the conversations around the tables where I sit sometimes reside around the weekend's activities. Golf might be one of the things. I don't really golf, right? So then suddenly there's a little bit of polarization because I'm feeling a little bit like an outsider in the club because I don't do the same things. I don't talk about the same things. I may not have the same hobbies, but I'm very much the same leader as the people around the table. So you get this heightened visibility because people look different, are different. My voice is higher pitched than everyone else around the room. I'm more diminutive than many in the room. There's polarization because our hobbies might be different. Our responsibilities at home might be different. And then there's this kind of interesting phenomenon of assimilation. So you go around the table and you're a token and you find yourself like, well, should I take up golf? I don't really want to be a golfer. I've never thought about golfing. But maybe I'm going to try it. So then tokens can find themselves on a Saturday golf course with their very well-intentioned colleagues golfing, and they do it, and everyone feels great about it, but then there's this element of entrapment. So you went to golf, you golfed, right? You kind of became a part of the club, and then finally you're like stuck. You're entrapped in a hobby that you never really wanted to have in the first place. And I say this like I'm using golf as an example, but there are many other examples like this. So these are the challenges of tokenism. It doesn't take much reading of popular press these days to understand that diversity is a strategic imperative. There's plenty of literature about how diverse companies outperform. There are investment banking groups that will not invest in companies if they don't have diverse boards. This is one of many studies that I'll share with you. This is a study out of Germany, 151 companies, and they looked at the percent of women on the board. Then they looked at return on equity. And you can kind of see here, when there were no women on the board, the return on equity was okay. They did pretty well. When they dropped down to a token woman, 1 out of 10, the performance dropped. And then, if they got more diverse, performance improved. Okay, so like what's going on here? Like why does that happen? Well, let's think back to kind of polarization, entrapment, assimilation. People just can't really be themselves. And for people who've been the token in the room, it's really hard to represent the entire gender. Right? I have never given birth to a child. I adopted my children. So when I'm looked to as the expert on lactation, I care about it, right? I care about it in the same way that Brian cares about it. I never did it, but people look to me like, you should know. No, my children came to the United States at ages 8 months and 6 months. I don't know. So it's hard to represent the entire gender, and I can only imagine what it's like to be intersectional as a minority. Okay, and so I want to, that's a huge caveat. I'm throwing it out there. There's minority status, women, and leadership, but then there's intersectionality, which just compounds some of these issues. And so I'm speaking about women in leadership, but I want to acknowledge there's other factors at play. So if you look at the original study, kind of the critical mass, this is what Dr. Moskanter was talking about. When you reach critical mass, suddenly the numbers are sufficient to allow this dynamic of change Because no longer do you have one person representing an entire gender. You've got 3 people out of 10 who can be individuals. They can agree with one another. They can disagree with one another. And they can be themselves. They bring their whole self to their performance. And so that's why that return on equity increases when you hit critical mass, because people are suddenly behaving like themselves. They're bringing their whole self, their whole expertise to play. All right, so now next we're going to kind of refute the critical mass excuse for the low numbers of women in leadership. You've all heard, like, well, it's going to get better when we just need to allow kind of the matriculants to mature, and then the Holy Grail will be better. Well, I'm just going to share. These are hot off the presses. I looked at the AAMC webpage last night. So currently, at least the most recent data that I know from AAMC show that 22% of the chairs nationally, so all departments, are women. And, interestingly, 22% of the deans, the permanently seated deans, are women. I don't know about AACEM, what the current numbers are. I don't know if Brian or Sue know, but less than that. Okay. So in emergency medicine, a specialty that we all love, right? You're hearing that the numbers are a little less than that. I'm going to just share a little bit of Mayo Clinic data, but I'm not here to impugn my own organization, okay? Right? I love my own organization. I suspect that this is true of your organizations. Don't know that for a fact, but we have a very traditional promotion and tenure single-track process, okay? And if you look here, these are all of the Mayo Clinic faculty across all of the sites, so Mayo Clinic, Rochester, Arizona, and Florida. Okay? 29% of the faculty with rank are women. 17% of the professors are women. And then, if you look here, there are 231 female professors. 18% of the women with rank are professor, and 35% of the men with rank are professor. So you can see that's a huge rank gap. And why do I bring it up right now? Because there are many positions, leadership positions, in my organization, and I suspect your organizations, that are rank attached. You could not be the dean of the School of GME as an associate professor. So there are layers of issues that lead up to this issue of visibility of women in leadership, and academic rank progression is one of them. So I'm going to show you a little bit of history. In 1985, I was a sophomore in high school in 1985. 30% of the matriculants in medical school were women. Like, whoa, right? I wasn't paying attention as a sophomore in high school to what was going on in the medical field, but 30% of the matriculants were women. And 30% of the faculty were women. So we've had critical mass since 1985. If you have one picture in your head, when you're listening around the tables for people talking about why it's going to get better when, we'll just, yeah, that's true, but it's going to get better when, I want you to think of that picture, right? I was a sophomore in high school carrying a boombox to the basketball hoop, and 1985. We've had critical mass since 1985. This is not the answer. Period. So this is an awesome article. I encourage all of you to grab it, put it in your important files, print it, whatever you do, however you consume information these days. But Deborah Hellitzer and Diane McGrain wrote this article, and it goes through some of the history, but it really is kind of a call to action. And I like this quote. They say, "We conclude that the promise of critical mass as a turning point for women should be abandoned in favor of critical actor leaders, both women and men, who individually and collectively have the commitment and power to create gender equitable cultures in academic health centers." Women and men, individually and collectively, commitment and power. That's why it's relevant to all of us in the room. So this is a small diversion. These are my children. This is my husband, and this is my husband's best friend, Lance. And the NCAA Final Four was in Minneapolis. I'm a former college basketball player. My husband is also. And this is his college teammate. So it was a big deal when the Final Four came to Minneapolis, and we got great tickets, and we took the kids and had a grand old time. Okay, it was one of those amazing experiences in life. So we're big fans, and I pay attention to these things, and because I played college basketball, I tend to follow the women's game also. So many people do a family pool for the NCAA tournament. We do two, men's and women's. I always win the women's because many people don't pay attention, and so it's I just take away the money every time in the women's tournament. It's awesome. So Sedona Prince was a little-known women's basketball player at the University of Oregon. She was not that great. She's good enough to play college basketball. I want to be clear, she's really good. But she was not one of the superstars. But when the NCAA tournament was in, I think it was Texas, and the men's tournament was in Indianapolis, Sedona Prince was aghast. She's 6 feet tall, muscular, an incredible athlete, just like all of these players are. And this was the weight room. These are the finest women's basketball players. That was the weight room. Now, I don't lift weights. I do not lift weights. And that is not enough for me. Imagine when you're a muscular athlete, that's not enough. So she was upset, started to ask kind of questions, and then somehow, some way, got a picture of what the men's corollary in Indianapolis looked like. And she posted them on Twitter, and it went viral. Seth Curry picked it up. It just became this media frenzy. And in one act, posting an inequity using social media with her voice, she was a critical actor leader. Not someone who agitates in this space, but she just saw something, said something, did something, and changed it. Now, there are still issues, and I won't go into them, but I will tell you that this year's NCAA tournament, the March Madness logo was used for the first time. The swag bags were equivalent. The meals were equivalent. It's really quite remarkable what one post by one person, a critical actor leader, did. The financing of the NCAA tournament, there's room to improve, but at least we've made some progress. What does it look like in academic health care? So this is Dr. Keith Lillamo, who's the chair of surgery from MGH. And at a national meeting, he was kind of reflecting on the state of leadership in surgery. And he said, "I believe the pipeline is no longer the issue. The number of outstanding qualified female candidates for surgery chair positions," is what he's talking about, "is more than adequate to fill up every open surgical leadership position in America today. The problem is not the pipeline. It's the process." A critical actor leader using his voice, using the platform that he had, and the influence that he had to be provocative. So, what can we do? What can we do today to enhance the visibility of women in leadership? I'm going to give you some critical actions that might feel right. They may not. You may not like any of them, and that's fine. You may find your Sedona Prince moment somewhere else. But I would encourage you to be a part of the solution, because waiting for critical mass already happened decades ago. 95, 2005, 2015, 3 decades ago. We've had critical mass for 3 decades. So we have to do something different. So sit at the table. This is Sheryl Sandberg. If you haven't read Lean In, it's worth reading. Chapter 2 talks about sit at the table. And she gives this, I don't have the book with me, and I couldn't find the exact excerpt. So forgive me if I'm going to paraphrase. But the concept is that she was hosting, I think it was Timothy Geithner and a group of people, and I can't remember what Geithner's role was at the time, but anyway, it was a team of high-level executives were coming into Facebook, and they were gathering food, and then they were going to sit around the table, and Geithner's team sat around the table, the Facebook executives were around the table, and then these 2 women on Geithner's team who were exceptional, they were there, sat kind of outside on the perimeter, and Sheryl Sandberg kind of invited them up to the table, like, come on. And the women, she says, demurred and resisted her invitation, like, no, they were not interested in moving seats. And she goes on to talk about the importance of sitting around the table. So I'll just share with you something. This really resonated with me, okay? So this is it's no longer the room, but this was the room where the department chairs at Mayo Clinic, when I was a department chair, met. 6:45 a.m. It was a god-awful hour. This is not the emergency medicine clock. But anyway, I showed up for my first meeting as a new department chair, and I was surveyed the landscape. Dr. Noseworthy, who was the CEO, sat right here, and I kind of looked. There were seats around the table because I wasn't going to be late for my first meeting, and I picked that chair right there. It was really the perfect one. I happened to sit next to the neurosurgery chair, who said to me, go sit at the table, go sit up there. And I was like, no, I'm sitting right here. I like this chair right here. It's the perfect chair for me. And then I kind of wondered, you're a department chair. Why are you sitting here if you're telling me to sit there? It was like this trick question. So I sat there. And I will just share with you, I did exactly what those women in Sheryl Sandberg's chapter 2 did. I kind of demurred and planted myself firmly there, right? But the science says that if you want to be effective as a leader, you should sit there, right there. So if the chair of the meeting is here, the power position on that table is right there at the other end of the table. Okay? How do we know that? Well, it comes out of jury selection. It's a fascinating topic. So here, if you get drafted for jury duty and you don't want to be the foreperson, choose your seat carefully. I would not pick that seat. And if it happens to be 3 people on this side and 2 people on this side, you don't want to be on the side with the 2 people. You want to be on the side with the 3 people. So it's an interesting dynamic about where do you sit. And honestly, I don't believe that you need to be Machiavellian about your leadership. I want to be clear on that. But I do think it's important to sit at the table. So over time, I got much more comfortable sitting around the table, and I encourage all of us to do so. And I think what that neurosurgery chair was doing at the time, like he was trying to be kind of an ally. So I appreciate that in retrospect. At the time, it was a little bit too much for me on the first day, but I think in retrospect, it was really a lovely act of his. Okay, so be an upstander. So an upstander is a person who takes action, particularly when the easiest or most acceptable course is to do nothing. So prior to my dean role, I led a healthcare system of 5 hospitals, outpatient clinics, and so in one of the communities where I was kind of leading, there was a Fortune 500 company, so Hormel, so spam. So I was meeting as the regional vice president with the Hormel executive team, and they wanted to talk about healthcare benefits and the cost of healthcare, and so I knew that the meeting was an important meeting for them. It was an important meeting for me, and I was new in my role. Okay, so I showed up at Hormel's headquarters with my team, who were some administrators, the site CEO for Austin Medical Center, who was an orthopedic surgeon, kind of a 6'2" gentleman, my age, and then we were meeting with Hormel's HR people, benefits people, and their executives. Okay, I was seated here. The Hormel executive was here, and then our teams were around the table. So I had gotten kind of the seating right this time. And as we're having the conversation, after introductions happen and people kind of gather and sit down, the Hormel folks launch in, and the conversation is going like this. Mark Shoddy, he's a physician, the orthopedic surgeon, is seated right here to my left. And all the conversation is going to Mark Shoddy. All of it. I'm the highest ranked Mayo Clinic person in the room. And it was the most amazing moment for me when Mark Shoddy said, he leaned forward on the table and he kind of put his hand out and he's like, I need to clarify something right here. Dr. Sadosty is my boss. Think about that for a second. If I had tried to do that, right, how would that play? Excuse me, need to clarify something here. No. I'm the boss, right? Like, that does not work. It does not work. It doesn't. So what he did was the most beautiful example of being an upstander that I have seen. And it was just quick, sophisticated. It did not create drama at all. And suddenly, the conversation came to me. We established kind of norms, and we went about our business. Okay? We all can be upstanders. So sponsor her, nominate her. I know that at your organizations you get emails about like this. Submit so-and-so for the Innovator of the Year award or the Educator of the Year award or for this committee or the alumni board position, whatever it may be. They come to your inbox all the time, right? I have to say that probably earlier in my career, first of all, my network was pretty small. I was very comfortable with a small network. And so I think over time, you build a network and then you have a broader group upon which you can draw when you start to nominate and sponsor and other things that we'll talk about a little later. But I'll tell you, These hit my inbox all the time, and I didn't think much of it. It was almost the institutional version of spam, right? If you could auto-delete it, you might, but you can't really, right? Until this happened. So I'll go back. This was the call for the Distinguished Alumni Award. This is the premier, capstone moment in a career. Okay? Mayo Clinic Distinguished Alumni. They went into my spam file. I may or may not have engaged, whatever, right? And then this happened. There was a really professional picture on the Mayo Clinic intranet that's posted Mayo Clinic Distinguished Alumni. I lost my mind. Because there's no doubt. I mean, one of these people is a former Mayo Clinic CEO, exceptional. There's no disputing the credentials of these individuals. I'm not here to do that. You can't. They're really extraordinary. But there are some really, really extraordinary others who seem to be overlooked, right? So that's an example. I think the reason it got my attention was the starkness of the photo, where I was at that place in time in my career, and my ability to influence was better. But I received that information through the web, and I thought, this cannot happen again, right? Cannot. So Bert Wong in the Harvard Law Review describes something called the inexorable zero. And the Supreme Court has used this as a defense, or they cite this in some of the decisions that they make, where the sense is that there's nothing that could explain adequately why there are 0 female referees. It's not a competency. People can blow a whistle, people can run, people can see if someone fouls someone, right? So the inexorable zero is something that he described, and then credit to Julie Silver for kind of amplifying that out of Harvard. But it got my attention. So what did I do? I mean, you can be angry, which I was. I called a friend, and I had this behind the closed door moment of oh my gosh, really? Then I looked back at the history of the award and realized it was not comforting. It did not get better after that. But I had to do something, because you can't be angry, right? Being angry doesn't get you anywhere. I'm not an angry person. I'm not a bra-burning, angry person. That's not me. So I wanted to get past frustration into action. So we hatched a plan. And there's not a shortage of talent. You just have to, when you're thinking about distinguished or when you're thinking about leader, the unconscious biases tend to point toward a certain phenotype. So we need to counteract that to ensure that we're tapping into the totality of the talent around us. So this is Dr. Patricia Simmons, who was a member of the Mayo Clinic Board of Governors when I was a junior faculty member. And I remember presenting to the board and kind of being afraid of her in the sense that she was so impressive to me. And she made such, she was a role model, but she didn't even know that she was. I watched her move, and her elegance and the way that she went about her work. And I never told her that. She was a pediatrician, adolescent gynecologist. Like, when would I ever run into that person at Mayo Clinic, right? But she was an extraordinary leader who then went on to be a University of Minnesota trustee, on the Walker Art Museum's board. I mean, just really someone who has led in a variety of different venues. And so I thought, well, if Patty Simmons is one of the most impressive people I know, then I have a responsibility. When that silly email comes to my inbox, I'm not going to sit idly by again, right? So I hatched a plan, and she got the award, and the next year it looked a little bit different, and I played one small part in that. But it was really like she was so touched. My life was enriched because I got to sit next to someone who's been just really a role model for me, even though she didn't know it. And so hatch a plan. Don't be angry. Figure it out. Normalize the second list. So right now, I'm currently chairing the dean search for the Mayo Clinic School of Health Sciences dean position. And this is an example where when you're a leader and you run searches, when you call for nominations, sometimes you don't get a diverse slate, which isn't to, in any way, the first go-around, anyway, say that those people aren't qualified. They're really qualified. But what we want is a diverse slate for people to compete. So normalizing the second list, you have a call, the nominations come in, and then as someone who runs searches, we, all of you, can say, okay, who else do we have? And then you can be proactive in the current search. I took all of the lists of the professors, because it's a dean position, requires professor, and I just sent emails to my friends who are extraordinary, who have qualifications in this space, and I said, sure hope you're aware there's an extraordinary opportunity out there and your name might be on it. Would like you to consider applying. Some people said, no, thanks, I've got a great gig that I'm happy with. And other people were like, thank you so much. Hadn't really thought about myself in that way, right? So normalize the second list. Distinguished educators. Women are, traditionally communal. This is the kind of the bias that people carry about us. So a Distinguished Educator Award, you'd think that the biases would work in the favor of the women. Organizationally, that's not true, and I suspect it's not true in your organizations too. Again, I work for an amazing organization. I'm just sharing with you, I'm being real with you, and I encourage you to think about, what does your organization do? These data are available. You just have to look for them. I know that the extraordinary educators, right, there are more than 15% of us out there. So normalize the second list. Be sure that you're getting a diverse slate as you start to make selections. SAEM's award data, I shared this last year. People weren't super happy, but I'm just going to share with you. I say that like, this is the truth. Power to truth to power, okay? This is the truth. 25% of the SAEM awards have gone to women. Now, SAEM is doing a really nice job now. I think it was last year's awards, 44% went to women. Normalize the second list. If nominees come in and it's not diverse, who else? Be active, proactive. stop prescriptive bias. So I talked a little bit about descriptive bias. Women are communal, men are agentic. What does that mean? Men are decisive, they're leaders, they're aggressive. Women are nurturing, kind, maternal, right? Those are the descriptive biases that are attached to each gender. So it is true that men are agentic and women are communal, but it's also true that men are communal and women are agentic. The challenge is that there's prescriptive bias that factors in when we receive something that is counter to the descriptive bias norms. So when we as humans see a male who is communal, it's a little bit like this is counter to what I was expecting, right? And that can result in social reprisal that actually works against the success of the man who is communal. Same is true for a woman who is agentic. Being aggressive, being a leader, being assertive, right? All those things are important in leadership. But women have to walk a very fine line there because there's social reprisal, pointy elbows. I'm being recorded so that there's the the witchy witch, right? So you have to be very careful. So when I think of prescriptive bias, I think of prescriptions, right? Because I used to, as I was trying to learn some of the vernacular and understand this better, it's hard, stereotype threat, descriptive bias, prescriptive bias. But if you think of prescriptions, right, we write them all the time, thou shall not, or take this and, right? This, when you hear, well, thou shall not, she shouldn't do that, she shouldn't, think of prescriptive bias. And I'm going to kind of just make a little bit of a, I'm going to step two sides over and say that prescriptive bias, when you hear the word she's too, it's prescriptive bias. Okay? So I have little soccer players. Even though I played basketball, they chose soccer, and so I've had to learn a whole new sport, which actually is an unbelievable experience as a soccer mom. And it's the beautiful game, and it's the beautiful game for a reason. And letting your kids find their path has been really quite a joy for me. So I've spent a lot of time on the soccer sidelines and have become enraptured by a game that I never really knew existed because it didn't exist for me at the time when I played, okay? But Megan Rapinoe is arguably the finest women's soccer player in the game. And many of you probably around the World Cup time, there was a little bit of Twitter activity. There was a time when there was a lot of Twitter activity. And the long and the short of it is that she made a statement that she wouldn't go to the White House. And there was a lot of social reprisal. So Megan Rapinoe is not the only athlete to say that they weren't going to go to the White House after winning the national championship. Seth Curry, Tom Brady, Michael Jordan, lots of premier athletes have said that. They didn't suffer the same degree of social reprisal for making the same statement. Okay, it was a different era. Twitter didn't exist in all of those spaces. But she's too, you put the adjective there, it's really kind of impugning her approach, which is she has a stance, she's taking a stance, she's not going, right? Many others have said the same, but she wasn't communal nurturing. It was counter to what everyone expected, and she suffered she didn't really care, but she suffered social reprisal for that. And so I tell you that because if you listen carefully when you're making selections about candidates, I encourage you to listen and act. If you hear she's too, or it has an edge, or she has pointy elbows, these are the phrases that you'll hear. It's kind of a euphemistic term for she's a leader. It's a euphemistic term for she's a leader. It's prescriptive bias. To lead, you have to be assertive. Sometimes you have to have a pointy elbow. You have to be direct, right? You do. Now, can you do it with a smile, and can you be effective, and can you nurture people around you? All those things are true, yes. But sometimes leading a code, you've got to be exacting. And sometimes you need to say, I need you to move away, and I need you to do that line, right? And when I do that, it's very different than other people when they do that. And there's literature about resuscitation. All of you are familiar with that. The same is true to the leadership space. So I can spend time saying, excuse me, I'd like you to move aside, and we're going to have someone else come into that space, right? That's the more communal approach, but it takes a lot of energy. And so I just encourage us to listen carefully. When we hear she's too, ask ourselves, is there something really there, or is this just prescriptive bias? Someone is kind of being characterized in a way that is counter to what are considered to be social norms. And then finally and lastly, show our possible selves. So many of you saw the Harvard wall on social media. There was kind of this, Boston Globe ran a big photo, actually, of the wall where medical students have their first classes. And it's just this history of Harvard. And it was all white male pictures. I haven't been in the room, so I don't want to speak as though I know. But every organization has its own historical wall. I think that Harvard, to their credit, did a good job of taking those pictures, honoring those individuals who were important in the history of Harvard, and redistributing them so that it wasn't this like message to the people in the room that to be successful at Harvard, you have to look like these people. So they kind of redid that auditorium, is my understanding. But MAYO has this. This is the MAYO library. And we need to just start to show our possible selves. And so some of the people in the audience know that I'm really quite an introvert. And I know that all of you are looking at me like, no, you're not. You're a liar. I am. It takes a lot of energy for me to be up here right now. And I will go back to my room and kind of decompress. But why do I do it? Well, I enjoy helping others. And if we don't, as one of the 22% or whatever it may be, we're not being the role models for the next generation. And so I encourage all of you to put yourselves out there a little bit so that, for me it was Kate Halpern, it was Michelle Byros. This is the generation of people who I sat in this audience and watched. Patty Simmons, I watched them. And I was grateful for their example. And it showed me that it could be done. Right? So with that, these were the objectives. I hope you have a better fluency about tokenism and critical mass and the history of it. and some of the dangers associated with tokenism and why we should kind of aspire to allow for critical mass so that individuals can act as individuals, not merely a representative of the race or gender that puts them into that minority status. The value of critical mass accelerates the dynamics of change, and I showed you one example, but pay attention. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever you read, there's plenty of performance-based data about the value that diversity brings. And then when you hear that old adage that like it'll get better when the pipeline matures, just stop the dialogue. 1985. And then I gave you some critical actions for you to consider. I hope you'll read the article by Hellitzer and McGrain. They really have some nice history in that article, and you can decide what feels right. Being an upstander might feel right. Normalizing the second list might feel right. Saying yes to an invitation 2 days before the actual talk might feel right. But we need all of us to participate. And I would be remiss if I didn't just stop for a second and acknowledge I'm speaking as a woman leader about visibility for women in leadership. Marie Carmel Ellie would have been talking about diversity, and if you ever have a chance to talk to her, I think from the lens of race, I'm not sure what she was going to talk about, but I have heard her speak on that topic. She's an extraordinary speaker, and so put her on your list of people to attend their talk next year, because she really is remarkable, and you would have really enjoyed her talk too. So, so thank you for your attention, and we have like 5 minutes that I'm sure there might need to be a changeover with the next speaker, but I will be around for a little bit before I go decompress for hours. But nice. Okay. You got a question? Thank you.
I'm struggling with this because it goes between a sense of justice and fairness and also the desire to create equity. And it's something that happened from our department recently, but I'm going to change the details of it to make it hypothetical. There was a leadership position that opened up, and there were 2 candidates. And both would be competent for the job. But candidate A was more senior, had more experience, had more funding, and again, both would be competent, but just had an edge. And in the department, there's a definitely preponderance of men in leadership positions. As you can probably guess, candidate A is a man, and candidate B is a woman. What do we do in that situation? What do we do?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I would say this is, you're being vulnerable and offering forward an example from your department that is modified sufficiently. But I'm pretty sure that every single table has that exact example in their departments. I will tell you what I do. I'm not going to tell you that it's right, and I'll just share with you around my decanal team. So I rotated into my role. MAYO has a rotational leadership. So I was selected for dean and started in June. So I'm coming up on my end of my first year. And they had been holding the rotations of some of the other senior associate deans for the dean to be named so that the dean could choose the next leaders who would be reporting to me in this case. So I've had several opportunities to select senior associate deans, and the decanal team was 80% white males that reported to me when I assumed my role. And the way that I have managed that, because those exact examples have happened in the senior associate dean searches, is I said diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. I am advancing a key strategic initiative within the School of GME in the DE&I space, and I need to walk the walk that I talk, so to speak, right? So we will have a diverse team because it's a strategic imperative for the School of GME. And so then each selection, I have kind of said, well, here's where the status of the decanal team is. We've had a call. We normalize the second list. We get a diverse slate. And then we make a selection. So what happens when you have two, in your example, two capable people who are equivalently able to do the job? One has a little bit more experience and is not bringing a diverse perspective, diverse gender, diverse race, whatever it may be, a diverse something. I say diverse teams outperform. It's a strategic imperative for the School of GME, and we need to have a diverse team. So we select for that. In the same way that if you needed a research chair and you wanted to advance patient-oriented research, you might not pick a basic scientist, right? It's the same thing. But we get a little tied up in knots around it. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. That was awesome. One of the things you said earlier really stuck to me. I hadn't thought about it as much. Was sort of this pernicious effect of rank attachment. And I can think of 100 times where I've said, "Wow, that is stupid," or "Why do we have that in there?" or "When do we need it?" I've never faced a scenario where we're like, "Thank God we had rank attachment on that position. Like it really helped us." So, have people been effective at sort of removing that? Like, how do you get rid of that? How do you pull that out? Like, it seems arcane.
Well, when you have the magic wand, you can do a lot of things. So yes, to answer your question, first of all, not every department approaches rank in the same way. I mean, some department chairs are, it might, I don't want to speak. At MAYO, the department chair works with the individual to kind of prepare the packet and advance the packet to the AAPC committee. Some departments, the department chair, that's their priority. Faculty development is a huge thing, and they do it really well. In other departments, they're distracted, they have different priorities, whatever, you call it what you want. And so, same candidate, different departments. Like if you had the same candidate, just today they're a neurosurgeon and tomorrow they're an emergency physician, same candidate, each department would approach that differently. And so my fear is that you've got a bunch of professors who are sitting in the division of endocrinology or the department of PM&R who aren't advancing through rank, not because they aren't capable, but because they're just not getting the attention, right? So there's an equity issue there. And so I have opened up for the searches, the dean searches. Again, it's a dean team, right? I have accepted associate professors nearing professorship in the candidate pool because I don't think it's their fault always that they're still associate professors. So it was to Brian's point earlier, like, you have the realm, the sphere that you can control. I can't remember the phraseology that you had, but you don't have to accept the historic norms if you don't want when you have the magic wand. And so sometimes it takes someone saying, I view the world a little differently, and here's my why, and we're going to be open to entertaining the candidacy of the associate professors who are, in my mind, nearing professorship. And that's okay, because I'm pretty good at faculty development, and I'm comfortable ensuring that this person advances through ranks. So, but you're right. Like the chair of the AAPC committee probably needs to be a professor. Does the chair of wellness need to be a professor? I don't think so. Might they have a broader network or scholarship, more scholarship in that space? Yes, but does professorship really apply to the role? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So ask yourself every time when there's a call or when you're writing a job description in your roles, should we be rank attached or not? Or should you just be searching for leadership or wellness skills or whatever it is for the job description? I never thought of it as pernicious, but I like that. I might use that. It is kind of pernicious, isn't it? Especially when it's almost like it's like almost a 2x difference in Well, thank you very much for your attention.